What is up, my YouTube family? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, then it's just welcome to my channel, not welcome back. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button because you will not be disappointed, you guys. Today's video, we have a lot to unpack, a lot to uncover. So I'm not gonna waste no time in the beginning. We're just gonna get right into it. Today's video is about a very interesting individual, to say the least. Let's talk about it. So Robert Allen Durst was actually born on April 12th of 1943, making him an Aries. He's an Aries, y'all, and y'all know the Aries like to tussle. So, don't give him too much in the comments, girl. If you do, just be ready to tussle back. Now, he was born in Manhattan, but shortly after his birth, his family did move to Scarsdale, New York. Robert is born the eldest of 4 children between real estate mogul Seymour Durst and his wife Bernice. And like I said, Mr. Seymour was a real estate mogul, okay? He had a lot of money. And so Robert was pretty much born with a silver spoon in his mouth, as the old saying goes. But that does not mean that his childhood was completely perfect, all roses and unicorns. When he is just 7 years old, his mother Bernice jumps from the roof of their mansion. The children in Seymour were all present at the time that this happened because it had taken place one evening after everyone had gone to bed. And according to Robert, moments before it happened, his father had come into his room to wake him up, telling him, "I want to show you something," before walking him down the hallway to a window where he could see his mother standing there on the roof in her nightgown. Now he waves at her, not thinking, why is mommy on the roof? And he does not believe that she saw him, but like literally seconds later, she just jumps. Now, according to his brother Douglas, Robert is a complete liar. Yes, they were all home at the time, but no one saw it but the maid. Now, I'm gonna let you decide who you want to believe, Robert or Douglas. But after watching Robert do interviews for literally hours, like hours of interview tapes, he does not seem all that trustworthy. He definitely will tell you a lie and look you right in your eyes doing it. So I just don't believe him myself personally. But aside from my own personal perception of his character, it just does not make sense. Why? If Seymour spots his wife standing on the roof, why would he go get one of the children, a 7-year-old, to bring him to the window instead of going to get his wife off the roof? It does not make sense. Why would you want your child to even see that? Bernice was very young. She was only 32 at the time, and this incident is actually ruled an accident and is released to the public as a slip and fall from the roof of their mansion in the middle of the night. Although a lot of people speculated that it just definitely was not that. And I'm pretty sure the maid probably told somebody out there what had actually transpired versus the story that Seymour wanted to release to the public. He just did not want the public to know the truth, what had really happened. After this incident with his mother, Robert begins running away from home very often. Now, he was not experiencing any type of abuse or mistreatment. According to him, his father was not, that kind of dad. He just should have been more present, especially considering what had just happened to his mother. Robert also has a very toxic sibling rivalry with his little brother Douglas that is so bad that the two of them have to go to counseling about it. And at just 10 years old, the psychiatrist mentions a concern of Robert showing signs of having schizophrenia. He also shows signs of deep-rooted anger that the psychiatrist warns Seymour may manifest itself in the near future into some serious psychological problems. Now, he attends Scarsdale High School, where a lot of his peers describe him as pretty much just a loner who stays to himself and does not bother anyone else. And after high school, he attends Lehigh University, where he earns a bachelor's degree in economics. And unlike in high school, he was a lot more social and involved with his fellow classmates. He plays on the varsity lacrosse team. He is also the manager of the student newspaper. After graduation, instead of following his father's footsteps and entering into, the family business, real estate, he opts to enter the medical field and enrolls in a doctoral program at UCLA. And there he meets and befriends a young woman by the name of Susan, who is actually the daughter of a big-time mob boss. And the two begin what would turn out to be a lifelong, super long-term friendship. Completely platonic, just good friends. And although he thought at first the medical field was for him, he realized really quickly. The child, it was not. And so he drops out at UCLA and returns home, still without any interest in working for his father. Instead, he moves to Vermont and opens up a little health food store in 1970. He frequently travels back and forth between Vermont and New York, and during one of these trips home to New York, he meets a nice, gorgeous young woman by the name of Kathleen McCormick. The two of them hit it off immediately, and their feelings for each other progress really quickly. In no time at all, the two of them are in love, and after just 2 dates, he asks Kathleen to leave her job behind as a dental hygienist and move with him to Vermont. She accepts this invitation and feels like it's a good idea despite her family's reservations about her moving in with someone she had just met so far away. But she is not worried at all. She has complete faith in their relationship. Things are going well for Robert, and he is happy until about 2 years later when things take a turn. His business is not doing as well as it once was, and by 1973, roughly 3 years after it opened, the store is closed. Robert is then yet again left unsure of his future and where he is headed in life. However, one thing that he is sure of is the fact that he wants to spend the rest of said life with Kathleen. The two of them tie the knot on his birthday in 1973, and now a husband with even bigger responsibilities, his father Seymour is able to convince him that he should return to New York and give the family business a try. You haven't even attempted to work here, sir. Like, just give it a try. Seymour Durst really believed that this would be a good thing for Robert. However, he didn't really consider if Robert would be good for the Durst organization, which is the name of his company. I don't think I've mentioned it yet. Nevertheless, Robert agrees to join the family business, and as his career life is seemingly coming together, his home life begins to fall apart. He is becoming increasingly jealous, very possessive, and abusive toward his wife Kathleen. Now, when they had returned to New York, she was also offered a job working at the Durst organization, but she still, of course, had her dreams of being in the medical field. And even though Robert was always very well aware of her aspirations from the time that they met, because during that time she was actually a dental hygienist, he is not particularly happy about her decision to, pursue her dreams, her original aspirations. And he was very upset when she enrolled into a medical school in New York, because he expected her to just work at the family business as well. And I think he might have been jealous because his little stuff didn't work out. And so now he wants her to just abandon her goals and dreams and work alongside him. Very reminiscent of Ike and Tina. You remember when Ike got mad at Tina? I think it was Rolling Stone that wanted to interview her. And he was like, why y'all want to talk to her by herself? And real jealous acting. That's what he was given. As their marriage progressively becomes worse and more, toxic, she finds out that she is actually pregnant. Now, she and Robert had discussed children, and he had always made it abundantly clear that he does not want children. Good on you, because you didn't need none. He did not want children ever. She agreed, but it's unclear if these were her original feelings as well, or if she just agreed that they wouldn't have children because this is what he wanted. Regardless, when she finds out that she is in fact carrying his child, she wants her baby. But Robert tells her that if she has this kid, he will definitely divorce her. He also warns her that it'll be in everyone's best interest, including her own, that she does not go through with this pregnancy. So she doesn't. Despite his family's massive and growing fortune, Robert is extremely cheap and tight with the money, and he refuses to cover any of her medical school. Not only that, Kathleen has to spend her own money on anything outside of the bare necessities, which puts a financial strain on her at times. There are also times where he refuses to pay for essential things such as home repairs, and 10 years into their marriage, it is very, very strained. The relationship between them has become very tense and neither of them are happy. Robert's attitude only continues to get worse, and his abuse of Kathleen is physical, it's mental, emotional, child, financial if you ask me. And it gets to the point where she actually tells her friends, if anything happens to me, it's Robert. Like, Robert did it. Don't let him get away with it. And she tells them this because she has finally gotten to the point where she wants a divorce, and she is ready to tell him that, knowing that he will not take it well. Once she delivers the news to him, the two of them separate and she moves out of the home that they share into her own apartment. And the apartment that she moves into actually belongs to the Durst organization. Once she is out into her own space, she was feeling a lot more confident about her future and just going on with her life without Robert. She is also very happy that she was only one semester away from earning her degree and entering into a career that she was very excited about. But 1 month shy of graduation, things take a turn for the worst. On the evening of January 31st, 1982, Kathleen unexpectedly shows up to a dinner party that she was not invited to. That sounds rude, but not like that. She wasn't supposed to be attending. This dinner party is being thrown by her good friend Gilberta over in Connecticut, about 35 minutes from her apartment in New York. And when she arrives, aside from her, not being expected, the friend notices that she is obviously upset about something. But her and Robert were known to fight about things and fight pretty often, so this was really no surprise. What is surprising to the friend, though, is the way that Kathleen is dressed. She's wearing red sweatpants to a dinner party. And Kathleen was known to dress well on any given day, especially for an event. She stays for a while, but before the party ends, she receives a phone call from Robert and decides to leave, headed back home instead of staying till the end of the party. The two women make plans to meet up at a local pub in Manhattan in a few days. But her appearance at this party is the last time that anyone would see or hear from Kathleen, other than Robert. Days go by, and as scheduled, Gilberta shows up at the pub and Kathleen never does. She, of course, becomes very concerned. She begins calling Kathleen's phone repeatedly, and when she does not get an answer, she then begins to call the local police department. Now, the police are not all that interested or helpful in the beginning, but she does not give up. She remains persistent, calling them every day, day after day, telling them that her friend is missing. This is unlike her to just disappear, fall off the grid, and that her husband may have done something to her and that they needed to check this out. 5 days after the dinner party, Robert Durst files a missing persons report for Kathleen as well, and at this point they begin to take it a little more seriously. They speak with the people at her apartment building, and the superintendent as well as the doorman claim to have seen her on the morning of February 1st, which was the morning after the dinner party. And according to her school, they had not seen her at all, but she or someone claiming to be her had called Monday morning to the school, February 1st, to let them know that she would not be in attendance because she was ill. Now, she did not specify when she would be returning to the school. She just wanted to let them know that everything was fine. She would just be out because she was sick. And neither the school nor the apartment staff had seen or heard from her since. Now, because her friend had told police that she had just had a fight with her husband, and because they always look at the spouse first, they then contact Robert Durst to question him a little further. Now, Robert tells investigators a very different story than what the friend had told them as far as the state of their marriage. He and his wife had not fought recently. In fact, they had gone to dinner the night of the dinner party after she had left there. And afterward, he had dropped her off to catch a train back to NYC, and that's the last time that he had seen her. But he had spoken to her later that evening when he called her from a payphone around 11:15 p.m. to make sure she had gotten home safely. According to him, she confirmed that she had and that she was at home watching television and everything was fine. Or at least he thought everything was fine. He had only realized that she was missing when her school contacted him 4 days later saying that she had called in sick and they were having a hard time getting in touch with her. Now, he says at this point he attempted to reach his wife, but he was unable to reach her either. And so he figured by morning, if he hadn't heard from her, then he would escalate it to the police, which is what he had done. Search efforts are made for Kathleen, but they don't turn up anything. They cannot find anything that points to where Kathleen could have gone or what could have happened to her if something in fact did happen to her. In the meantime, Robert wastes no time clearing out her apartment and advertising it as available to rent. 3 weeks after her disappearance, the superintendent at the apartment complex finds a lot of Kathleen's belongings inside the trash compactor at the apartment. Robert had just thrown all of her things away. Many of their friends and relatives who are interviewed by police all point the finger at Robert. They all suspect and bet that he had something to do with her disappearance. They present every text, every email, every situation that they can recall where he was physical with her, any and everything that detailed their tumultuous relationship and his abuse. They even find out that 3 weeks prior to her disappearance, Kathleen was treated at a hospital for facial bruising that had happened at Robert's hands, proving that they were not recently in this great space that he had told police that they were. Now, according to one of her close friends whom she had told about this fight that had happened and resulted in her being seen at the hospital, it had happened because she had told Robert that she did in fact plan on going through with the divorce and said that she was asking for $250K in the divorce settlement. And out of anger, he had just attacked her. Afterward, he went on to cancel all of her credit cards, removed her name from all of their joint accounts, and stated that he would not be giving her anything. Now, unfortunately, Kathleen chose not to go to the police or press any charges against Robert for this incident. She had only told her friends about what had happened. Police then go back to Robert to question him a little bit more about that night. What did you do once you left the payphone? And he tells them that after he left the payphone, he had gone to a neighbor's house for a drink. And then after that, he had gone home for the night. But he actually hadn't. When asked, the neighbor is honest and tells police that Robert had not come to his home at all. In fact, he didn't even know that this lie had been put out there. Robert hadn't even attempted to circle back and clue the neighbor in on his little lie. And when they confront Robert about this being a lie and ask him why did he tell them this, he simply says that, quote, "I figured that would just make everything go away," end quote. He then claims that he really went straight home after calling her, but figured it would be better to appear to have an alibi than say he had just gone straight home. In his opinion, he felt like alibis, like having one, just made you seem a little bit more trustworthy. And he expected them to just say, okay, well, he was out doing stuff, and move along to the next person that, they wanted to question or suspect. Now, when this lie comes out, he doubles back and retracts the whole part about him pulling over to use a payphone to call her, which then changes to him taking a late night walk and then using a payphone that he had walked upon to call her. And as they continue to talk to him, he finally just comes clean and admits, okay, there was no call. Like, I didn't make a call. I didn't leave home on my feet. I didn't leave home in a truck to call her. There was no call. And I don't know if Robert is really smart or if he's just really dumb. And I don't feel like I got clarification. Even after all of my research and interview footage, like, I genuinely still don't know. Now, police are becoming more and more convinced that the friends and family of Kathleen might be right, that he may have in fact done something sinister to his wife. Without any solid physical evidence or a body, it is hella difficult to prove that he has done something to Kathleen. Difficult, but not impossible. Robert then appeals to the public, asking anyone with any information about his wife's disappearance to come forward, and offers $100,000 cash for any information that leads to his wife's safe return. He also hires a private investigator to oddly look into the claims made by the apartment staff that they had seen her on February 1st. The PI finds that the superintendent was not even working that day and does not live on the premises, so it would have been impossible or highly unlikely for him to have seen her that morning while he was working, as he had said. And I have no earthly idea what his reason or purpose was for poking holes in the superintendent's claims to have seen her February 1st on that morning, but yeah, he does. As time passes, the 100K reward is reduced to 15,000, and Robert appears to be in the beginning stages of moving on with his life, as if nothing had ever happened. He'd even begun dating another woman. And 8 years later, in 1990, police are no closer to solving the mystery of what had happened to Kathleen than they were the 8 years prior. And Robert decides to go forward and divorce her, claiming abandonment, spousal abandonment. He moves in with his girlfriend, Deborah, continues working for his father. And tension between Robert and his other siblings just continues to get worse over time. And it comes to a peak when Seymour Durst decides that instead of appointing his firstborn, Robert, who had a lot of behavioral issues at work and barely came to work, by this point he literally was barely showing up at the office, is not to be his heir. He refused to allow Robert to take over and essentially run his company into the ground because he knew that's what Robert was going to give. Instead, he appoints his other son to take over the Durst organization in 1992. And it is the brother that Robert has this long-standing, lifelong beef with, Douglas. This really upset Robert because he felt like he was entitled to inherit the company despite his disdain for it. He was barely coming to work. He really did not even want to work there in the first place. And even after he joined the team, child, he still didn't want to work there. Whereas his brother, Douglas Durst, had devoted his entire life up until this point to follow in his father's footsteps and help run the company. He accuses and blames Douglas for stealing what was supposed to be his and threatens his brother's life. And Douglas took this seriously. Like, he really believed that Robert might, end him or have somebody else end him. So much so that he hired security to be with him 24/7. And this, of course, causes a huge rift between Robert and the rest of the whole Durst family. Robert goes on about his life doing other things, and in the year 2000, Robert makes a pretty big decision regarding his future. He marries long-term girlfriend Deborah, but as soon as they begin planning their little future together, his past comes knocking at their door. Investigators decide to take a second look at the Kathleen Durst disappearance and reopens her case. Now, the first time around, investigators were pretty lazy. They had not even searched the home, the marital home that the two of them had shared. They only went and looked through her apartment. So they go all the way back to square one and stumble upon what they believe to be a key piece of evidence. The morning after Kathleen and Robert had dinner, 3 calls were made to the Durst organization from Pine Barrens, New Jersey. According to employees at the Durst organization, only one person would collect calls to the Durst organization, Robert. Immediately, they began to suspect that he might have been out there disposing of Kathleen. They go and question him about these collect calls, and he's like, sure, yeah, I always made collect calls to the company, because why should I have to pay for calls when Seymour can pay for the calls? Like, sir, y'all got all this money, you got all this money, and you don't want to pay for a collect call? Like, so then they ask him, why were you in Pine Barrens, New Jersey? And to that he says, I wasn't. And they're like, you just admitted to making collect calls to the company. Like, we have the records of the 3 collect calls made that put you there in Pine Barrens, New Jersey. And he goes, well, yeah, I said I make collect calls to the company, but I didn't make those calls. And it's a payphone. They have literally no camera footage and no way of proving him wrong. They then begin to entertain the idea that maybe he was not in Pine Barrens after all. Like, maybe he's telling the truth about that. He may not have been there, but he is very close to someone who likely was. Now, I don't know if things have changed since, but during this time, that particular area along the coast, Pine Barrens, New Jersey, was known to have a lot of mob crime activity. They were known to take people down to this particular piece of water to sleep with the fishes. And what connection does Robert have to the mob? His good old friend, Susan Berman. And if you don't remember, it's the one he met in UCLA that I mentioned earlier in the story. Now, Susan was a very reliable and loyal ally to those she considered friends. And she also lived in New York at the time of Kathleen's disappearance. Putting these little puzzle pieces together, they suspect that she was the female voice that called Kathleen's school on February 1st, letting them know she would be out sick. So their next order of business is to go interview Susan. Susan is currently living in California. So they give her a call, let her know that they want to speak to her, and she agrees. So they set up a time and a date for the interview. Now afterwards, she immediately contacts Robert and tells him that police want to speak with her regarding her relationship with him, and they also have some questions for her regarding Kathleen's disappearance. She assures him that she'll tell them what she's always said, which is that her friend is innocent, that she does not believe that he had anything to do with this. But the interview never happened. Just a few weeks later, on Christmas Eve, Susan is found in her home, shot execution style. Despite all the speculation surrounding this and how convenient the timing was, and even the fact that they had solid proof that Robert was in California the day that she was discovered, and they know this because he had purchased a plane ticket from San Francisco leaving at 10 p.m. back to New York. The LAPD still does not list Robert Durst as a suspect whatsoever. Instead, they believe that because she is the daughter of a mob boss, this has to be mob related. And so they take off with their investigation in that direction, believing that this was coincidentally around the time that she was supposed to speak with the investigators about Robert and Kathleen, but confident that that is not the case. Now, they are not complete fools, right? Because Susan was a writer, and at the time, she was working on a piece to reveal mob intel, and she would tell her friends that she couldn't give them the specific details on what she was about to expose, but just know that it was about to blow everybody's minds, knock everyone's socks off. So the LAPD felt like it's likely that a member of the mafia ordered the hit to keep her from revealing whatever it was that she was about to expose. But before they can even get their little investigation underway, the police department receives a very strange piece of mail. It's a white envelope with Beverly Hills Police written on the front of it. Beverly spelled all kinds of wrong, child. And inside, it is just an address and the word cadaver written. The address is actually Susan's, and the letter was postmarked the day before she was found. It was very obvious that whoever had done this cared enough about her not to want her to lay there decomposing. This was obviously done so that she would be found right away. Now this makes the LAPD switch gears because the mafia would not have cared to do this. Of course, they go and ask Robert about this letter, and when he looks at it, he says that he recognizes that as Susan's address. He also says that it looks like whoever wrote it was trying to conceal their real handwriting. This is another thing that made me question whether or not he was smart or dumb, because this plants the seed in their mind that this is not the person's real handwriting, and so they don't even bother to compare it to his or anyone else's for that matter. Susan's computer is confiscated so they can search it for evidence or clues, and in it they find a log where she had been keeping track of payments that she had received over the years. They also find out that she had been having financial issues for quite some time now. Among those payments listed was $50,000 from Robert Durst, with no text explaining why he would have sent her the money. Now, the detectives draw their own conclusion. They believe that maybe she had threatened him or blackmailed him with her upcoming interview with the police, and the $50,000 was to ensure that she kept her little mouth closed about Kathleen. Robert brushes off this theory, stating that he was never worried about her telling the police anything about Kathleen because they were best friends and she would never betray him like that. He then tries to make it clear that he is referencing conversations only that they have had about Kathleen. Conversations where he just, confided in her as a friend. Nothing more, nothing less. In the days leading up to Susan's funeral, he contacts several of her friends, and he even gets in contact with her stepson, making casual conversation about how awful this is, but he does not attend her services. He does, however, keep in contact with her stepson and begins sending him money for his school tuition, and from there keeps a very low profile. Then, months later, in September of 2001, Galveston, Texas is shaken and shocked by a very gruesome discovery made at Galveston Bay. A male torso floats up out of the water onto the rocks. Police come out and begin scouring the area for any kind of evidence, and almost instantly all of these little black trash bags began washing up out of the water, each bag containing either an arm or a leg, and in the end everything washes up but the head. For days they dive and search for it, and during their search they find a newspaper with an address printed on it, and they immediately contact the owner of the property. Now the owner tells them that he does not live there, but the property is actually a duplex, and he rents each side of the duplex out to 2 different tenants. In apartment 1, there's an older man by the name of Morris Black, and the neighboring unit is being rented out by Dorothy Siner, an older mute lady. Now he is quite familiar with Morris Black, but Miss Siner is very quiet to herself and he doesn't see her much. She had actually paid up her rent for the entire year at the time that she had moved in, and that was basically it. He really didn't see her much after that or talk to her much. And the reason why he was more familiar with Morris Black is because he did have a couple of like altercations with people in the neighborhood, and he wasn't that to himself like the other tenant. And they are able to fingerprint one of the hands and get the identity of these parts, and they actually belong to Morris Black, the 71-year-old tenant in apartment 1. The police go out to the property, and there was a common hallway shared between both tenants, and someone had done a very terrible job cleaning up blood. It was still very visibly nestled between the floorboards and all of its cracks and crevices. Now Miss Siner is not home at the time, but the landlord grants them permission to enter both units. And Mrs. Siner's apartment is very clean, but there really isn't that much inside of the apartment anyway, aside from these huge tarps taped down to the kitchen floor, which was extremely noticeable and strange. They lift up the tarp, and at first glance, there's nothing out of the ordinary here. It's just the kitchen floor. But then one of the investigators notices these tiny cuts in the, it's not tile, it's like, it looks like tile, but it's really like a thick sticker. I know y'all know what I'm talking about. They notice these tiny cuts, like as if they were made with maybe a box cutter in the floor. So using a blade, he cuts a giant square into the flooring, peels it back, and underneath those cuts and slits in the flooring are blood stains. I just know the landlord had to be looking at him all kind of crazy. Like, sir, I let you in here and you gonna come up here and cut up my flooring? And y'all know the police, they don't pay for stuff that they destroy when they, you know, searching for stuff. And there is more than enough there for them to get tested in the lab, and the DNA comes back as matching Morris Black. Now, mind you, they're in Miss Siner's apartment, so what is Morris Black blood doing down on Miss Siner's floor? They're completely perplexed. So they go back out there and search through Mrs. Siner's trash can that had been put outside, and they look through every little piece of shred or anything that she had thrown away. And amongst the trash, they actually find a receipt for eyeglasses that were scheduled to be picked up in a day or two. And the person's name listed as the customer for the glasses, Robert Durst. Tenant number 2, Miss Siner, is actually Robert Durst, living as a woman, a mute woman, in an effort to keep a low profile and escape all the heat he had been receiving from the LAPD and the NYPD. And he couldn't get that little voice quite light enough, so he had to go in there and be a mute woman instead of just being, you know, a regular old woman, regular old lady. Simply relocating would not have been enough because he was attached to such high profile cases, so anyone would have recognized him. He had even shaved off all of his body hair for this role, including his eyebrows, which he said he meant to do that, but I really believe he tried to shape them up a little bit and got carried away. Maybe one got knocked off and he just had to make a match, because nobody shaves off their eyebrows like that. Now, why did they ask the landlord if Miss Siner was attractive after they found out that she was actually Robert Durst? Just messy and childish. And he actually tells them that she just looked like the average middle-aged woman with a flat chest. Child. Now, one of the investigators takes this receipt for glasses over to the pharmacy and lets the staff know that when this customer shows up, they are to call him pronto. Like, stall a little bit if you can, but call me right away. The investigator didn't even believe that it would be that easy, but it is. However, by the time the police had arrived to the pharmacy, he had just left. Luckily, when they were pulling in, he had just pulled out. So they're able to catch up to him in traffic. They stop him at a light, approach his vehicle to arrest him, and in the backseat of his car, they find a saw. And not only that, Robert still has very fresh cuts on his hands. Now, the officers that arrested him said that they were stunned that this was the guy that had committed such a heinous act because he was so meek and mild-mannered and nice. They take Robert down to the jail and set his bail. Now, mind you, they have figured out that he is living under a false identity, but they still don't know who he is back in New York. When they tell him how much his bail is, he is very shocked. And they assume that he is surprised because of the amount. But Robert is actually shocked that they would even give him a bail in the first place. He thought it was insane for them to expect him not to run. Now, the police officer is thinking he is shocked because he doesn't have that kind of money. So he taunts Robert and says, $250K, do you have that kind of money? And Robert goes, well, not on me. Robert smiles for his little mug shot. He goes to make his one phone call, and that one phone call is to his wife back in New York, Deborah. He tells her that he had been arrested and why, and also that he needs $250,000. She tells him that it'll be there by morning, and they hang up. And just like that, he is out of there within 24 hours of being arrested. Now, he knew from the moment that he heard he had a bail that he was gonna go on the run, okay? His hearing date comes up. He does not even attempt to attend. And he is then declared the nation's first billion-dollar fugitive. It does not take them long to find him. They find him in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania at a Wegmans grocery store. And not because they have been tipped off or because they had been following him and found him. No. Robert have been apprehended after attempting to steal a chicken sandwich from the deli and a Band-Aid. I just want to know, how do you pay $250,000 to bail yourself out of jail and turn around and steal a chicken sandwich from a grocery store and a Band-Aid? And we're not even talking about a Chick-fil-A sandwich here. We are talking about a grocery store deli chicken sandwich. Like, make it make sense, baby. That's all I ask. At this point, you just out here doing stuff. Like, you just out here doing whatever at this point. To make matters even stranger, when he is arrested at this Wegmans for this chicken sandwich he stole, he had $500 cash in his pocket. And that rental car that he had driven down to the grocery store had an additional $37,000 cash inside of it. He also had multiple weapons, the devil's lettuce, and last but not least, Morris Black's driver's license. Robert finds himself two of the best lawyers money can buy. His two lawyers cost him nearly $2 million. Their game plan was simple: self-defense. The prosecution enters only one charge: premeditated first degree, and no lesser charges. No manslaughter, nothing. Like, that is the single charge that he is up against. By the time that his trial begins, New York is ecstatic because they're feeling like this was a, quote, home run for Texas prosecutors, and we're just waiting on their turn at this point. They still had not found Kathleen and had not found a shred of evidence, so they didn't feel confident that they could get him on Kathleen. But they did feel confident that they can get him on Susan after he receives, his little conviction down in Texas. Now, leading up to the start of the trial, his lawyers claim that they have a very difficult time communicating with Robert. So they enlist the services of a psychiatrist who spends over 70 hours examining Robert, and at the end of the 70 hours, diagnoses him with Asperger's syndrome. His legal team decides to use that as well to argue that this diagnosis explains his behavior. And as for what had happened between him and Mr. Morris Black, Robert describes Morris Black as a very confrontational, very angry and cranky neighbor who had walked into his apartment unwarrantedly, unwelcome, and uninvited, wielding a .22, like he was going to do something with it. And so then Robert had no choice but to confront him. The two of them began to tussle, and during the tussling is when the .22 went off and it hit Morris Black in the face. Now, he admits to then dividing Morris Black into trash bags and throwing it into Galveston Bay. And because the head was never located, there is no way to validate or dispute these claims made by Robert. And because of this lack of evidence and the prosecutor's failure to prove intent and premeditation, on November 11th of 2003, the jury acquits Robert Durst. But he is not completely out of the woods. They hit him with 2 counts of bail jumping and 1 count of evidence tampering for what he had done to Morris, of course. He pleads guilty to these charges and receives a sentence of 5 years, but he is credited for time served, and so he is only looking at 3 years in prison. July of 2005, he is paroled in order to stay at home. He is not to leave his property surrounding his home for no reason unless he has asked for and been granted permission to do so. But child, Robert is hard-headed. And so he makes an unauthorized visit to his old apartment where he was living as Miss Signer. Then he decides to take himself to the mall, and as he is strolling through the mall, he runs into the judge that actually presided over his trial and made it very clear to him that he is not to leave his home without permission. Needless to say, she violates him and sends him back to jail. But he is released again in March of 2006. When Robert gets out of jail this time, he sues his family for his share of the family fortune and is bought out of the family trust for $65 million. And yet again, Robert couldn't just get his little money and sit down somewhere. In 2014, he walks into a Houston CVS store and pees on the candy rack. Afterward, he casually walks out and just walks down the street. Of course, the clerk called the police. They catch up to him. He is charged and pleads guilty to criminal mischief. And for this, he does no jail time. He is just given a fine of $500, which is nothing to him, obviously. Meanwhile, police have not given up their pursuit of justice for Kathleen and Susan. And they finally catch a little bit of a break when they stumble upon a letter that had been written to Susan by Robert a long time ago. They hire a forensic specialist to compare the 2 handwritings between that letter that was mailed to the police station and the one that he had mailed her when he was living in New York and she had moved back to California. And baby, they could have hired me. They could have hired me because I could look at those 2 handwritings and see that they were the same. The handwritings are identical. He had written that letter to the police in his actual handwriting and then turned around and made the comment when it was presented to him that it looks like somebody changed their handwriting to write this letter. Like, when he made that comment, like, is he being sarcastic? Is he taunting the police? Or is he just trying to throw them off? Maybe it's a combination of the things. Not only is the handwriting the exact same, but that misspelling of Beverly in Beverly Hills, the same. He really couldn't spell Beverly, y'all. Also, as far as the word cadaver, remember Kathleen was in medical school. She had a cadaver and she talked about her cadaver all the time. To friends, to family members, even to Robert's old grumpy behind. Comments will be made about how they just hear the word so much, just cadaver this, cadaver that. And the general census among investigators is that no one really uses that term when referencing a body. Like, that's not typical. And so at this point, they're feeling like they're getting closer and closer to a conviction. Meanwhile, Robert gets bored again, and so he decides that at this point, he wants to reach out and tell his story, but only in a way that makes him comfortable, because he said he didn't like that true crime stuff. Sorry, Robert, not sorry. And would rather do it in person, interview style. In 2015, HBO releases a 6-part documentary called The Jinx, The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst. I watched it. If you are interested in it, I definitely do recommend you watching it. It's very interesting.
I had nothing to do with Susan Berman's death.
A lie.
Did you have any theory yourself of what might have happened to Susan?
No.
Look at them eyes. Lies. There is definitely more information than what I could fit in this video, but I feel like I got the bulk, like the meat and potatoes of the storyline. Now, I do have to warn you though, there are some images that are very in your face in the documentary. Like, they don't blur anything out. They show a lot of crime scene photos and it's a lot. So consider yourself warned, proceed at your own risk. But in it, he has a very interesting conversation with the interviewer, and when they take a break, the interviewer walks away from the area. He's still sitting there, and he begins talking to himself. And immediately you see his lawyer come up and tell him like, hey, be careful. We can hear everything you're saying. Your mic is picking up everything. Robert is like, okay, he acknowledges this. But immediately after the interview is over, he walks into a bathroom, still mic'd up, and again begins talking to himself. He's rambling kinda, but you can hear clear as day. There it is. You're caught. And he said that in like a disappointed, like, oh, you done really messed up now voice. And he continues to ramble on a little bit, and then he says, what the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course. Finally, with this, the plane ticket out of California and the letters, they have enough solid evidence to arrest him. And on March 14th of 2015, the day before the 6th part of the documentary airs on television, Robert Durst, at 72 years old, is arrested for the murder of Susan Berman. And you know what? Robert loved him some of the devil's lettuce, child, even at 72, because literally each time he was arrested, he had ounces of it on him. Now, Robert had planned to flee America for Cuba once the 6th episode aired, and he had been preparing for this for weeks. He'd been making daily withdrawals. He had taken out a total of $315,000 in cash over the previous month, and he had even gotten himself a little fake ID. He was ready for his new life in Cuba, but he just had to stick around and watch that last episode, and that is how he ended up getting caught. And once arrested, things just continue to go downhill for Mr. Robert here. Now, November of 2016, he finally appears in court, but his trial date is postponed until April of 2018, and he is held in prison until then. And his trial date continues to constantly be pushed out after that for two different reasons. First, due to him having a serious surgery, and then it was consistently pushed out after that due to COVID, all the way up until May of 2021. Now, by then, he has developed bladder cancer, and his legal team takes this opportunity to attempt to have his trial date postponed indefinitely and have him released so that he can go and seek treatment. It was denied, and his trial officially began May 17th of 2021. By this time, he was really old, really sick, and wheelchair bound. But he showed up to his little court day with his mask on anyway, despite being next in the queue for the good old Grim Reaper. On September 17th of 2021, the jury convicts him, and the following month, he receives a sentence of life in prison. Hell, he only got a little bit of that left. Kathleen, unfortunately, is never found. He never admits to any wrongdoing, and so her family never gets answers as to what happened to her, which is really sad and unfortunate. In 2016, they decided to go through the courts and have her declared legally dead. Her mother then attempts to sue Robert for $100 million unsuccessfully, alleging that he disposed of Kathleen and deprived her family of their right to bury her. Now, his wife, Deborah, she had inherited all of his money. So then Kathleen's family attempts to sue her. I didn't see anything saying that they won anything. I think that was also an unsuccessful lawsuit. You know what's weird about he and Deborah's relationship, marriage? They only lived together the brief time before they got married. They never lived together as husband and wife. And between the time that he had left New York and went to jail, she was actually living with a boyfriend out in the open. It wasn't something she was hiding or doing behind his back. So a lot of people believe that they had sort of an arrangement where he just wanted her to get all of his money when he left here. So maybe that was it. Once he had gotten arrested this last and final time, they kept in constant communication. And she would even visit him in prison. Now, little Robert ended his 2021 catching the Rona, and that was the straw that broke his little back. He actually suffered cardiac arrest as a result of it just a few days ago on January 10th of 2022. And I'm mad that they took Betty White and let him come into the new year with us. That's not okay. At the time, he was 78 years old. And one last thing I want to mention before I go, there was a movie that was released in 2010 about him and Kathleen called All Good Things. I have not seen it. Don't plan on seeing it. And yeah, let me know if you've seen it. I'm also interested to know your thoughts on this case and this whole just a whole mess is what it was, honestly. If you enjoyed the video, please don't leave without giving me a thumbs up. Share this video with a friend. Share it to your social media. We are on the road to 200K and we are almost there. And I appreciate y'all so much. I love y'all so much. As always, I appreciate you so much for spending your time with me. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Peace. I was about to say the roof. Of course the roof was present. The roof was present, girl. The roof, not the roof. Y'all, these colors blend quite nicely for this to be like a $15 palette. He is becoming increasingly jealous, very possessive. What? And so now he wants her to just abandon her. Abandon what? And this apartment without the A, girl, without the A. As scheduled, Gilberta shows up. Really, motorcycle? They contact David. Who is David? Who is that? I'm pretty sure he wasn't no help, girl. They contact David. I said it again. I want them to contact David so bad. So then they ask him, why were you in Pines Barrens? Am I saying that shit right? Because it don't feel right coming off the tongue. Pine Barrens. Yep, not saying it right at all. The LAPD still... Did I miss a letter? Okay, let me get myself together, child. What? I done confused myself. Maybe she had threatened him or blackmailed him. They lift up the... I cannot keep going like that didn't just rhyme. Living in disguise as a mute older woman. Well, he was older by now, so... Shit. And I have so many questions that still were never answered. Because what was you about to do with the chicken sandwich and the Band-Aid? Did you need them for two separate things, or were you just about to do something strange with the two of them together? So what you need is... What is it called again? So what you need a forensic specialist for, my girl? I just don't understand. The handwritings are... I was about to say ideal. Identical, girl. Identical. The sandwich was $6, by the way. I'm still not over that. Like, that's ridiculous.